Today on the podcast, I'm so excited to have Demi Leigh Tebow joining me for an on-air counseling session. Demi, I am so grateful to have you.
Hey, Deborah, thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here. I know before we start recording, I told you that my stepmom is a neuropsychologist. She's got her PhD in neuropsychology. She's literally one of the smartest women I've ever had the honor of getting to know and knowing. And so I love what you do, and I know how her work has been so meaningful and impactful in so many people's lives. So just want to say thank you for what you do, and thanks for having me.
No, I love that. I was going to ask you what gave you the courage to come on and do an on-air counseling session, because I think it does take a lot of courage. It's like talking through some things underneath the surface, but I think you just answered that so well in that the example has been your stepmom and watching her work and minister.
Hmm.
I was telling you a little while before we started recording, in a way, this is a ministry,
Yeah.
helping people heal and pointing them to the healer.
Hmm.
So it is just such an honor to be here with you and to dig into your story a little bit. Before we dive into your story, why don't you just take a minute to introduce yourself for people who might be listening and they don't know who you are or what you're all about? Just tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're at in this season of life.
Yeah. Well, hey everyone. I am Demi Leigh Tebow, and if you hear the messed up accent, I am from South Africa originally. That's my home country, and I've been in the US for nearly 7 years at this point, and I am so excited to finally be an author. My book releases in August, and it's called A Crown That Lasts. So I'm the author of A Crown That Lasts, and I am so happy to be here.
It's so exciting. A first book is such a big deal. Okay, but we didn't hear anything about why are you writing a book? Who are you? What have the last few years held for you? And tell me kind of what has launched you into a public platform.
Yeah, Deborah, I had the opportunity to be crowned Miss South Africa in 2017, and that led to me being able to participate on an international stage and compete for the title of Miss Universe. And to me, that was such once in a lifetime opportunity. It genuinely was, because you are actually never allowed to compete a second time.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
you have to be your country's representative, and it's not like you can go back and win Miss South Africa again. That would be weird. So it truly was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I wanted to make the absolute best of that opportunity. Um, I ended up being crowned Miss Universe 2017, and I moved to the United States. That's where the organization was based out of back then.
Wow.
And it was, coming from a small town with literally one traffic light and one traffic
Wow.
circle, to moving to New York City was quite the change. And really, that's how I ended up in the United States. A couple months into my reign, I met my now husband, and I decided to stay here pretty permanently. And Deborah, the thing that led me to writing this book is there's been so many moments in my life where I have attached my worth and my value to temporary things. But I think the biggest part of my life that and I think this is a mistake I might have made a couple times in my life. So writing this book is one for my readers, but also I think as a reminder to myself to
Yeah.
to know the mistakes that I've made and to try to not make them again. And what this book is really based on is the night I handed my crown back. A time came where I had to take that beautiful crown off my head and literally give it back. Um, I gave it back. I walked off that stage. I rushed to the airport to get back home to South Africa, but I realized that I forgot something. I forgot something on that stage, and it was way more important than a crown made up of pearls and diamonds. It was what I had rooted in that crown, and that was my identity.
Yeah.
It was my worth. It was the thing that I thought made me valuable. And honestly, that left me spiraling into a very big, not fun waiting season that really just felt like a wasted season. And I elaborate all about that in A Crown That Lost. That's a little bit of, I would say,
Yeah, it's amazing.
how I gained the community that I have now, that I'm so thankful for, and thankful for everyone that's walked this road with me up to now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I truly get the sense that you are honoring the Lord with that, and how you're ministering and pointing to him. So I just thank you for your work there. Okay, so sometimes we look on Instagram and we see Miss Universe and all of the labels that
Mm-hmm.
get placed on you over time. And there's a psychologist by the name of John Locke, and he was one of the founding fathers of psychology, and he coined this term called the tabula rasa theory. And
Okay.
according to him, we're all born as a blank slate, just blank. There's nothing on it. Imagine a whiteboard with nothing on it.
Mm-hmm.
And as we go through life, the things people say about us for good and for not so good
Yeah.
start to get put on that board
Mm-hmm.
as labels.
Yeah.
And out of those labels, we start to form our identity.
Yeah.
And we live out of that identity
Mm-hmm.
until we get to a point where we meet the ultimate giver of identity. Now, John Locke doesn't say that part, but in my opinion,
Yeah.
until we meet Jesus, and not just meet Jesus, but learn to see our identity through
Mm-hmm.
the lens of Christ. So, thinking about the tabula rasa theory,
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to your earliest days as a little girl in South Africa with one traffic light in your town. And I want you to kind of talk me through, what do you think were some of those earliest labels that started to shape your beliefs about who you are, whether for good or not so good?
That's a great question. Really makes me have to like really dig deeper. I think you're so right, Deborah. You know, who we are is made up of a lot of our life circumstances, right? Like you said, like
Yeah,
theory says. And but the problem that I found with that is putting my identity in my life circumstances just really sends me on a roller coaster of
right.
questions, of insecurity, of unanswered questions. And I'm not sure you said, John, what his theory gets to, but I have had to realize essentially that I need to find something, someone to root my identity in that is bigger than myself, that is
Right.
fixed, that is never changing, and that is always trustworthy. And now I didn't necessarily know those things growing up. I think, trying to figure it out, I think some of my earliest labels that I probably received was I was always like a little leader in a way. I always somehow found myself to be the class captain, or in South Africa, we call it the head girl.
Yeah,
That's the title we got. And from middle school all the way through high school, I somehow eventually became the head girl of my boarding school. Was the team captain, was, just always participated in as much as I could. And I think that put a lot of responsibility on me. I
yeah,
think people somehow, because I ended up in those situations or with those titles, those labels, people look to me for answers in a sense. And I think I've always, thought that I needed to have the answers. And I think that might have led me to not necessarily seeking as much wisdom as I could or should have from a young age. My parents grew up, my parents were divorced when I was really young, like a baby, and they both got remarried when I was young, when I was 3 and then 5. And so I grew up with my step parents, and I'm truly so lucky and so thankful to say that I have two sets of parents. Both my step parents have raised me like their own and loved me like their own, and have had such a beautiful role in my life that I'm so thankful for. I told you about my stepmom, but my stepdad has also played a really great role in my life. But because I grew up in two separate households, I think, sometimes you might not necessarily hear conflicting opinions, but I even think of like church, right? Like I grew up in two different churches, and I don't even
right.
think that I realized I grew up in two different denominations until I was about 17 years old. And I
Wow.
think that caused some confusion unknowingly. I don't think
Right.
my parents or I,
Subconsciously. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, I grew up learning one thing in one church, but maybe a different thing in another church, just a different way of explaining it, or a different, denomination can sometimes have different just ways of communicating. And I think it actually left me so confused. And I just never knew how confused I was until one day, a friend of ours, I grew up in the church. I grew up as a believer. And I thought that I had given my heart to Jesus when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, according to my parents. But I remember one day a friend of ours very tragically passed away when I was in 11th grade. And our whole school gathered on the sports field to pray over his life and to pray over his family and his loved ones. And our youth pastor that, ministered to our school gave opportunity to surrender your life to Jesus Christ. And I just realized in that moment that for the rest of my life, I don't want to be confused. I don't want to worry about where I spend eternity. And I stepped forward, even as the leader in the class, even as the one that's supposed to have it all figured out, pretty much in front of all of my peers. I stepped
Wow.
forward and said, like, I don't want to doubt for another day. It's the best decision that I ever could have made.
How old were you?
I was 17.
17. Um, so are you a firstborn child?
Yes.
Okay, tell me, I know you had a younger sister who's in heaven.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about her and that dynamic, especially with having two households.
Yeah.
Like how did all of that work out? Help me have a little bit of a peek into that part of your life.
Yeah, ever since I could remember, I just wanted to be a big sister. And
No.
it was like the biggest dream ever. And I think I like bugged my parents for a little sibling for forever. My mom unfortunately couldn't have any more children. She would have had a whole school if she could have. And my stepmom and my dad ended up falling pregnant with my sister when I was 10, and she was born when I was about 11. So there was
Wow.
a decent age gap between us. And I just had all these dreams of playing dress up, taking her shopping, teaching her how to do her hair, teaching her how to play field hockey and netball, which is the sports that I grew up playing in South Africa. And all these dreams of, just thinking of like becoming a big sister. And um, when Franja was 4 months old, she got diagnosed with a brain dysgenesis that was threefold. And a part of that brain dysgenesis was that she had cerebellar agenesis, which means that she was born without the cerebellum. I'm sure you know all about this, but for your listeners, in short, what that caused is the cerebellum controls and regulates your whole nerve and muscular system. So anything that requires muscle usage, she had no control of. That means eating, that means holding, a mug, that anything that had required, that means swallowing, anything that required muscle usage, she had no control over. And we knew Franya's life would be difficult from a young age. Her life expectancy was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And she lived to be 13 until she eventually went to be with Jesus.
Wow.
And a whole different beautiful story of how I got to spend her last birthday with her, being based in the US at that time, but maybe another conversation. Um, so that's a little bit about Franya's life. I think growing up as the only child for a big period of my life,
Yeah.
especially those forming years, when Franya was born, and especially when Franya was diagnosed, I saw my parents like literally sleeping in two different rooms just so that one can take care of her and the other one can get a few hours of sleep. They both worked full-time jobs. My dad eventually left his corporate job of 17 years, where he had a great role and great position, to embark on a entrepreneurial journey where he literally transformed our home into a guest house, like a bed and
Wow.
breakfast, so that he can take care of Franya while, be working from home, basically. That we were fortunate enough to afford having care for her during the day so that my parents could work. But I mean, it was a very taxing role to be able to have. Franya required a lot of help. And so with all that being said, I think growing up, I just really wanted to not make any trouble for my parents. Not, I think I was very reserved in a way where I didn't want them to worry about my small problems in
Right,
comparison to Franya's life. And just wanted to be able to help, even though I didn't always know how to help. Um,
right.
just being helpful by not making trouble, I guess, was kind of my strategy.
Honestly, that is so important what you just said, because a lot of people don't realize that, first of all, when you're a firstborn child, in and of itself, you have a tendency to please. You have a tendency to be motivated to please your caregivers. That's
Mm,
part of the nature of a firstborn child. I'm a firstborn as well. I totally understand. We tend to be more responsible. We tend to be more attuned to our parents and what they need and what they're going through. So there's this natural tendency that comes with a firstborn. But then you pair that with a secondborn who has some special needs, and that natural tendency to think of others, to keep the stress low, to be responsible, not to make any mistakes,
mhm,
gets exaggerated even more, because
mm,
it's like there's not much room here. Not that anybody ever says there's no
yeah,
room, right?
right,
Nobody would
right.
ever say that. In fact, I'm sure if we interviewed your parents during that season, they would say, Demi, you are our priority. Whatever you need, whatever you want, like, we're here for you. But I think just the natural way that life goes,
Mhm,
as a firstborn, you see there's stress. There's
mhm,
a lot of financial struggle. There's emotional
right,
struggle. There's physical struggle. So I'm going to keep myself, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm not going
yeah,
to rock the boat. I'm
yeah,
going to succeed and do well and not get into any trouble.
mhm,
So here's a personal question for you, Demi. When it comes to you having needs and being able to express them, here's
mhm,
what I need. Here's what's going on in me.
mhm.
Has that come easy for you, or has that been a little bit of a challenge?
I think the fact that I had a clinical psychologist as a stepmom has helped to be able to ask for those things. I don't think it necessarily comes super naturally, but I think I've learned to identify that I need help and that I actually need to ask for it. I think, something that my husband tells me, or very often, as he reminds me, is like, hey, I don't know what you need and you need to tell me so that I can help you. If you don't express that to me, I there's nothing that I can do to help other than anticipate a potential need that you might have, right? And
Yeah.
so I think I've very much resorted to being like, I've got this. I'm going to figure this out. I'm not going to burden anyone. And if I really can't figure it out, well, then maybe I'll resort to asking for help. So I think the fact that I've had a stepmom that has given me a lot of awesome just tools and skills to apply into my life. I don't necessarily know if we ever had a counseling session, but growing up with a clinical
Right.
psychologist as a mom figure in your life, definitely was super helpful in ways that I probably never even knew. And honestly, I feel like a lot that I discovered writing my book, the chapter about my sister was the first chapter that I wrote, even though it's chapter 3. I like zigzagged writing my book. And Deborah, it was a really hard chapter to write because Franya passed away. I was based in the US. I knew she was not doing good. She was in hospital for a few days, and I missed the last flight to South Africa, and I didn't get to say goodbye to her.
Mm.
And oh, it still makes me choke up. That was really hard. Whew, well, that was really hard. And I think I just resorted to getting on the flight, being there for my parents, getting to South Africa, helping plan the funeral, getting back, doing what I need to do back here. And it wasn't until I actually started writing this book where I genuinely started working through a lot of those
Wow.
emotions and feelings. and just actually really dealing with it, because I start writing this chapter and I realized, man, like I have this story, I have this experience, but I actually don't know what I've learned from it yet because I haven't fully processed a lot of this. And so it was by far the hardest chapter that I wrote in my book because I was faced with actually dealing with the emotions in order to write a honest chapter in my book.
Yeah. I mean, I think that speaks to so many people when your natural tendency and wiring is to care for others, to take care of others, to be attuned to their needs. Like you said, your goal is like, I need to get there. How can I be there for everybody? How can I help? What does
Yeah.
everybody else need? And then your needs kind of sit on the back burner. They lag behind until you stop,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they catch up to you. Like, oh,
Yeah.
we're still here. There's still
Right.
grief. There's
Yeah.
still things to process for you,
Hmm.
your own experience and your loss and how you're going to process it and the story that you're going to tell yourself and the narrative surrounding that experience for you and how God is going to fill in the gaps of grief. What does that look
Hmm.
like for you personally? But I
Yeah.
think you're right. Sometimes when we're so attuned to the needs of others, it can be easy for our needs to kind of be minimized,
Hmm.
or forgotten altogether. And I'm so grateful that the Lord gave you an opportunity to like sit down, Demi,
Yeah.
and focus and bring some of that up to the surface for him to heal.
Mhm.
I think that's a really beautiful experience. And I also wonder if your salvation moment was so special because it was also the moment of you identifying, laying down that self-sufficiency
Mm.
that
Yeah.
you've been wired to have for so long. Like, I'm self-sufficient, I'm a leader, I'm here for you, you
Yeah.
know? And all of a sudden, you're laying that down and you're allowing God to say, I'm here for you.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's a really beautiful moment.
Yeah. That I love that. I think that's so true. I think for a long time in my life, I relied on a lot of self-confidence and having confidence in my abilities, in my accolades, in my, achievements. And I learned that confidence really just means to have full trust. And I think that's why when I let myself down, it knocked my self confidence so drastically because I had full trust in myself and my abilities, even being a believer my whole life, having grown up, as a Christian. Um, I think there was a part of me up until that salvation moment when I was 17 where let me get my train of thought here, where I knew about God, I knew the Bible, I knew scripture, but I didn't necessarily have that personal relationship in a big way where
Yeah.
I truly believed that me saying my nightly prayers isn't just a nightly prayer, but it is me speaking to my creator. And the Bible tells us that he hears us, he listens to us, and he thinks about us all the time. And it's one thing knowing that. I look at a lot of Bible stories and I'll sometimes feel like, oh, that's a Bible story, but I constantly have to remind myself that no, that's a Bible reality. That is something that actually happened. That's an example to me that can help me through whatever I'm living through. Um, so yeah, I think you're so right when it comes to a little bit of self-sufficiency.
Yeah, and honestly, what it comes down to is that the greater our needs,
Hmm.
the greater our need for him.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to see that when we're people who are wired to meet our own needs. It's like, I can meet my own needs. I'm self-sufficient. I'm self-confident. And not only that, but other people come to me for their needs.
Yeah.
And we have this high capacity, but
Hmm.
then we have low needs. And the
Hmm.
lower our needs, the lower our need for a savior, the
Yeah.
lower our need for a God who holds it all together. And it's almost like God was slowly exposing to you your need
Yeah.
so that he could be the one that you need ultimately.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's been a journey, like one layer at a time, for you to open your heart to your needs and allow him to be the one that meets those needs ultimately.
Mhm.
I'd love to hear how that played out through competition. Like the healthy version is, Lord, I need you. The unhealthy version is, I can do this on my own. How does all of that play out now that you're saved? You know, Jesus, you still have a tendency to probably put your needs on the back burner, self-confidence, self-reliance, and now you're entering the world of competition.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about what that was like emotionally for you.
I remember the night that I was crowned Miss Universe. They like announce, the top five, and then it goes down from like second runner up, and then I guess like the first runner up, and then the winner kind of hold hands, and they stand in the middle stage, and you're like standing there holding hands, waiting for the winner to be announced and knowing it's going to be one or the other. And I remember I love like every year when the anniversary comes up, they'll like have videos on social media, and I'll remember seeing that winning moment. And I just remember before Steve Harvey announced South Africa, I still feel my cheeks like hurting because I couldn't stop smiling. Like I genuinely, I couldn't close my mouth. Like I just couldn't stop smiling. My jaws were hurting. My eyes were just so like hurting from smiling. And I think the reason I was so joyful was not because I knew that I was going to win in that moment. There was no way for me to know that, but I think the reason I was able to be so not happy but joyful was because I actually genuinely felt content with whatever the results would be.
Mm,
I felt like I prepared as much as I could have prepared. I did everything in my capabilities to be there, to get to that position, and that if this was what the Lord had planned for my life, then it wouldn't miss me. If that was in his will, that wouldn't miss me. And Proverbs 69 tells us, like, in their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. And I think
yeah.
it was a verse that I really held on to in that moment. And listen, I can't tell you that I would have been excited to lose. Nobody prepares, for a once in a lifetime opportunity and is going to be excited to lose. Definitely not. Of course, that would have been hurtful. That would have just not been great in any way. But I knew that if I don't win, I was going to be okay because he had a plan regardless. And even though that was 7 years, 6 years ago at this point, I genuinely knew and believed that in that moment. And I think that's the reason I felt like I would have been okay. I might have cried for a little bit, but I would have been okay if I didn't win that. Now, I think going past that year, I think that year was just so crazy, Deborah. We were on like, I don't even know the exact number, but I know it was like over 20 international trips in one.
Wow.
And that's not just like to Canada or Mexico and back. Like, no, it was like across the world and back. Still feel jet lag from it. I woke up every day. The doorman greeted me as Miss Universe. My bag got tagged as Miss Universe. My introduction read, Miss Universe. The little label on when you do like a TV interview, they put like the label outside the
Right.
door. And that was like Miss Universe. It wasn't like Demi, it was Miss Universe. And I think the competition was one thing. I felt like that I was in a really good place. But that year, I became Miss Universe. That was a label that I was given. And quite frankly, I liked wearing that label. And the night I gave back that crown was that label just ripped off, and there was a lot of sticky
Mhm.
residue that was left. It just felt like the rug ripped from underneath my feet moment. And I was totally unprepared. And my whole life, I'd been preparing for the next moment, for the next thing, for the head girl in high school to what
Right.
degree I'm going to get to, then competing Miss South Africa. And the next step was always planned. And that was a moment where I just genuinely, like, I didn't even know how to find my like backstage room, my green room. My whole team of people that had surrounded me that whole year, people of everything from a manager to a social media manager to a stylist to security to everyone, had just flocked to their next purpose, their next
Wow.
goal. And it was, I didn't even have anyone like escorting me off of the stage. No ill intent, of course. Like it was just the way it was.
Right.
So,
That's a lot to process. So how did you process it? Like what was that like emotionally?
I think I resorted to just looking for the superficial next big thing. A lot of Miss Universes usually go into either acting or becoming models, and I thought that was what I was supposed to do. I moved back to New York and I signed with a big agency, and it was me just searching for the next big thing that I thought would make me feel valuable and worthy. And the truth is, I wasn't able to find that next thing.
Mm.
There were opportunities that came across my way that, would have probably given me the chance to um, really set me up for success in, let's say, the modeling industry. And they just still felt empty, and they felt like it still wasn't enough. And I knew that I was searching for something bigger. Although I had Jesus in my heart, although I knew him, although I had a personal relationship with him, I think maybe that was a time where I didn't fully surrender and I was trying to rely on my self-confidence.
You know
Uh,
what it is, Demi? As I'm hearing you talk, back to the labels that we carry. I think oftentimes as Christians, we believe that the most dangerous labels
mhm,
are negative ones.
mm,
We look at our board and we see things like not good enough or not pretty
mhm,
or liar or
mhm,
shame or all of these other things, victim.
mhm.
We look at those labels and we think those are bad, those are wrong, those do not align with Christ. We need to deal with those labels.
Yeah,
But we don't see the danger in the positive labels,
yeah,
the positive
okay.
labels that the world gives us.
Yeah,
Miss Universe, New York Times bestseller, national speaker, beautiful, all of these
yeah,
things that are good in and of themselves,
mhm,
but not on that board.
yeah.
The second we start putting them on that board, they become just as dangerous as the negative labels. And I don't think as Christians, we're attuned to that. It's like, oh, I
Mhm.
just want to get rid of all the negative identity.
Yeah,
But the positive identity,
yeah,
when it's not rooted in Christ,
yeah,
is just as weighty.
yeah.
It's just as dangerous. I think about something a pastor said this past week about why does the Bible say that, it is harder for a rich man to get to heaven than a camel to get through the eye of a needle? It's because the rich man has a lot to hold on to here in this world.
Mhm.
And when you have so much to hold on to here, heaven isn't as enticing, right? It's like, I have a lot to hold on to here. It's weighing me down.
Yeah.
And I think the same can go with this world and our accolades, our
Mhm.
success, our endeavors.
Mhm.
When Paul says, I don't look back anymore, I forget what is behind. He's not talking about his trauma history. He's
Yeah.
not talking about forgetting, I'm not going to look back anymore. What he's talking about is his accolades, his successes,
Mm.
his rewards, because he recognized how dangerous those things were to be on his board.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we miss that in the
Mm.
church. You know what I mean?
Mhm. That's so true. It's such a good perspective. I love that. Like I said, that was a label I liked wearing. Like I
Right.
I liked wearing that label. That was a comfortable label to have. That was a good label to have. That was a successful label to have. And I think you're so right. It's, it's the word that I attach to that good label. That's not bad. Something I
Right.
didn't have to deal with because it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't a negative thing. Um, so I totally think that's such a good point.
It's like both labels, whether good or bad, are burdensome.
That's fair. Yeah.
And we don't realize that, and we live with this burden. I put myself in a similar category as you, Demi, because I'm a firstborn child, an overachiever. I do things well. I always felt special growing up, and it's like if we're not careful, those things can also become the burden that keeps us attached
Hmm.
to this world. And I believe that the more we let go of those things,
Hmm.
the more God blesses us, because he's like, I can trust you.
Yeah.
You're not attached to the burdens of this world,
Right.
whether good or bad. And
Hmm.
it's so freeing because you can lay down your crown
Hmm.
and still believe
Yeah.
that you're worthy. And that's the journey that you've been on. It's
Yeah.
beautiful because again, it's like people want to hear counseling and they're like, okay, tell me all your bad stuff. But sometimes the good stuff can be just as burdensome and just as dangerous.
Mm.
And that's why Jesus was so aware that the negative can be just as burdensome. And when he told the rich ruler, go sell everything you've got, like, let's
Yeah.
see how you're doing in this area, what you're holding on to. And I find this conversation even challenging for me as far as like, what is it that we allow to be put on our tabula rasa?
Hmm.
Is it the words of Jesus alone, or do I add things to it?
Hmm.
Because they feel
Yeah.
pretty good. They feel
Yeah.
good. I like having it on there. But then the
Right.
moment they're taken away, we question, we
Yeah.
doubt, we struggle.
Hmm.
And I think that's beautiful. The other thing that comes to mind for me too is your relationship with your sister,
Yeah.
and how, in one sense, I bet you there was a little bit of a label, big sister,
Yeah.
caregiver,
Hmm.
and even there, the Lord had to be enough, had to kind of replace that identity with himself.
Yeah.
What has that journey been like for you?
I think, like you said earlier, we kind of put our own needs aside in a moment like that. And I don't think it fully, my sister's death, like, I don't think I fully got to deal with it until I remember like a very vivid moment, literally sitting right here in this office I'm speaking to you from, on her first heaven anniversary. And it was somehow like that day just like really wrecked me. And
Mm,
I don't think that I'd been so focused on planning a wedding and restarting a career and, moving to the United States and really making this home and, starting a life together with my husband, that it didn't necessarily hit me until her first heaven anniversary. And that was just I didn't understand why I was so crazy emotional, why I was such a wreck. It's been a year already. But I was, and I think that's where I started like having to really just work through losing her. And, I think it's not just losing her, Deborah, but it was actually also coming to grips with um, how she was made. I had so many questions, when she was born, I was 11 years old. And as a teenager, trying to make sense of my own faith, but also having all these questions for God on like, why?
yeah.
Why did you allow this? Why is Franya made like this? What is the purpose with her life? Where? How? Why? I don't understand. And my dad and I are very, very close. And I actually write about this in my book too. But my dad pretty much got to the point of nearly turning away from his faith completely because of my sister's life and just how difficult that was to see every day. It was hard. There was a time in her life where she had something like 42 seizures in a 24-hour period. Like it was just really hard to watch, and not being able to do anything to help her was awful. And seeing my dad feeling that way affected me drastically. Him and my stepmom went on a trip to Israel, and he told her that he would go with her, but just so that she doesn't have to go alone. But he doesn't want to go to any of the sites. He's going to wait on the bus. He doesn't want anything to do with this Israel trip. She can go, and he's just there so that she's not by herself. Well, the Lord is so kind, because my dad is a very visual person and also a very practical person like me. And the Lord used that trip to show his goodness to my dad and his greatness to my dad by making himself tangible, by seeing the empty tomb, by swimming in the Dead Sea, by, like it made it tangible for my dad. And I just think it's just he's so kind in the way that he loves us. Um, I kind of went on a tangent now, but yeah,
Oh, that's beautiful.
yeah.
We were talking about how, even in Frenia going to heaven,
Hmm.
like that label was
Yeah.
shifted for you,
Yeah.
and you were saying it was about a year into it that you finally felt like all the emotions came up
Hmm.
to the surface. That makes a lot of sense. Oftentimes trauma hits us later,
Yeah.
but specifically when you are the type of person who is very others centered.
Hmm.
Because what happens is during a trauma, your focus is everybody else. So you're kind of in survival mode. We just have
Yeah.
to survive this situation, get through it. Who needs help? It's like
Yeah.
survival. It's just like when a soldier goes off to war and they're on the battlefield,
Yeah.
they're not dealing with their trauma right
Hmm.
that moment. They're
Yeah.
surviving.
Yeah.
But then later on, when life is safe and secure
Hmm.
and it's quiet,
Hmm.
PTSD hits later
Yeah.
after the battlefield.
Hmm.
And so for you, you were kind of in a season a year later,
Hmm.
and all of the Lord started bringing that stuff to your attention and saying, it's time to deal with this now,
Yeah.
Demi.
Hmm. And Deborah, I think something that I learned from that was I asked why so many times. And Deborah, I came to the terms and to grips that I am never going to have answers to some of those questions until I get to meet my maker one day. And I knew that I had a choice to make. This was a couple years after my sister passed. I had a choice to make. I could choose to question God for the rest of my life, or I could choose to trust him. And
Yeah.
I realized that if I was going to choose to truly trust him with Franya's life, with her purpose, with the purpose that her life had, that I was going to have to stop asking the why questions and rather ask the where question. Like, Lord, show me where you are in this. Show me where, you can use me in this. Show me, just where, because I feel like when you ask why, you're questioning, but if you ask where, you're seeking. And
Yeah.
and I think that's been something, I mean, it's not like all my questions are answered. It's not like I don't have questions still. I just have tried not honing in on them and relying on somehow finding an answer somewhere. Franya was actually the reason my husband and I met,
Mm.
just to bring this story full circle, but with her form of special needs and disabilities that she was born with, the Tim Tebow Foundation has one of their initiatives that they work on for children with special needs and disabilities is called Night to Shine. And it is a worldwide celebration for people with special needs and disabilities, just like my sister Franya. And to make a long story short, my little sister was invited to Night to Shine because we have them in South Africa as well. I think they're in 56 countries up to date, which is awesome. It's our favorite night of the year now together. But that's how we met. And I
Wow.
look at the purpose that we have in our marriage and the purpose that we have together. Tim and I don't necessarily have a lot in common off the bat when we first met, but you can learn how to play golf together. You can learn how to play
Right.
pickleball together,
Right.
but it's harder to learn how to have purpose together.
Right. Right.
And that's something that I'm so thankful for. And I truly believe that that's just a small, tiny glimpse into the purpose Franya's
Yeah.
life had.
I I love that. And it's so true. Do I question for the rest of my life or do I trust? And that's not to say we don't have questions that we can bring to him and
Mhm.
needs. But ultimately, now we see dimly, and
Yep.
one day we will see clearly. And do I really believe that I will see clearly? And what I see now isn't full reality.
Yeah, that's
And
right. I
and
love
that's
that
what you're
verse.
holding on to.
Yep.
Um, I think the theme of our conversation today that we can hold on to, even as listeners, as you and I, the greater the need, the greater our need for him.
Hmm.
And we can marvel in our needs and be grateful when they come up because it's like, I can't be self-sufficient. I need you, Lord. I
Yep.
need you, Lord. And I think that's a really beautiful lesson.
Hmm.
Like your book says, a crown that lasts,
Yeah.
to be able to lay down even the good labels
Yep.
that we're given here in this world for the greatest label of all,
That's
Jesus
right.
Christ. And for us to stay grounded there no matter what comes, negative or positive, we won't be swayed
Yeah.
when he is the ultimate label.
Yeah.
And I find myself so challenged by that, even though I'm the counselor here. It's such a beautiful lesson for us to remember to let go, to throw off the burdens and everything that hinders,
Hmm.
including the good that comes our
Yeah.
way, and just
Mhm.
holding on to Jesus. And I
That's
thank
right.
you, Demi, for modeling that. I know this conversation is going to challenge a lot of people because sometimes we base our relationship with him on all we've done,
Yeah.
not just him and all he's done for us. And I think it's a much needed reminder for many people, as we're kind of living this life and growing our relationship with Jesus. So thank you so much for sharing your heart and your journey and letting us peek behind the curtains a little bit into your story. Can you just tell us, where can people connect with you? When does your book come out? And what's the best way to just stay connected with you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Deborah. I have loved even just learning from you today. I truly believe that there is so much wisdom in seeking wise counsel and putting people around you that love you, care for you, and have your best interests at heart. And so, thank you once again for all the work that you do and how you impact people's lives. Truly grateful for you. So, thank you for
It's a
that. Thank you for
pleasure.
this podcast and allowing people to maybe even have a little virtual counseling session and have a sounding board in you. So appreciate that. My book will be on shelves 13th August. So August, there's Audible versions, there's all the versions that you could need. I am so excited to finally join you, ma'am, in the author club too.
So
So
exciting.
it's been such a fun process. And yeah, anywhere social media, Demi Tebow, I'll be there. So
So
would
you
love
guys,
to
if you
connect
can
with you guys.
relate to anything that we talked about today, and just the idea that sometimes we forget to deal with the positive labels that have
Yeah.
been given to us by this world. But what does it look like for us to lay down those burdens as well and just hold on to Jesus? And so I thank you, Demi, for joining me. I encourage you guys to grab a copy of her book and get to know her, follow her on social media. She's such a bright light in this world, and pray for her and her family. And we just thank you, Demi, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I appreciate you. Bye, everyone.